Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, June 25th, day 628 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be here, Amanda.
The Israel-Iran ceasefire appears to be holding, and over the past 12 days of war, Iran's ballistic missiles caused the loss of life of 28 here in Israel and wounded over 3,000 people. More than 9,000 people are now displaced from their homes. However, a preliminary U.S. intelligence assessment has determined that the U.S. strikes on Iranian facilities have only set back Tehran's nuclear program by a few months. So with Haviv's help, we're going to sift through the pieces and try to discern, did Israel meet its goals? Did the U.S. meet its goals? Was there a victor here? And what was it all for? So all of this and more when we're back.
I often say that if we can only do one thing well, what we need to do is to delight the customer. Our goal is that everything we do falls into the background and the customer has the experience of, wow, that was easy. And our challenge and what has made it most interesting along the way is to keep finding ways to deliver the personal connection and the personalized service in a virtual world. We consistently get feedback unsolicited from customers along the lines of, this is the best company that I've ever worked with. At the end of the day, it's the care that each member of the team takes that makes the entire experience what it is.
I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. While the spotlight was on Iran these past 2 weeks, of course, the war in Gaza continued. And this morning, it was announced that 7 Israeli soldiers were killed in Gaza yesterday, apparently after a Palestinian terror operative planted a bomb on a Puma armored combat engineering vehicle that the soldiers were in while they were driving in Khan Yunis. 6 of the slain soldiers are named so far. These are their names. Lieutenant Matan Shai Yashinovsky, 21 from Kfar Yonah. Staff Sergeant Ronel Ben Moshe, 20 from Rehovot. Staff Sergeant Niv Radia, 20 from El Yachin. Sergeant Ronel Shapiro, 19 from Askeret Batya. Sergeant Shachar Manoav, 21 from Ashkelon. Sergeant Mayan Baruch Perstein, 20 from Eshchar. The name of the 7th soldier is expected to be released soon. Please check out our live blog for more updates. Let's turn to Iran. Schools across Israel have opened this morning, aside from some 300 institutions that were damaged during the 12 days of war. Life is somewhat going back to normal, Haviv, as normal, of course, as it can be while there's still a war going on in Gaza. What are you sensing is the mood of the country so far?
I think it's a lot of different things at once. There's a profound sense that the IDF just performed astonishing feats that, if you're, if you're watching this from abroad or listening to this from abroad, then a lot of the conflicts in the Middle East are mediated through these kind of morality plays of the discourse in the West, and people take sides and people have strong feelings, and it has a lot to do with their domestic politics. And you forget that they're real people. They're real people looking out at the world, whether it's Israelis, Iranians, Palestinians, whoever. And they perceive real threats to their real actual life. And so when the IDF performs well and Israelis are like amazed and patting themselves on the back, that's not a chest thumping kind of just patriotic little thing for foreign consumption to get excited about, one particular character in this morality play or another. It feels like safety. It feels like we were told for decades that a war with Iran would be catastrophic, that cities would fall, that Hezbollah would unleash, that, it was just not possible. And then the question was, well, wouldn't an Iranian nuke be worse? And then the war came, and it turned out that we could neutralize and destroy almost all their capabilities all at once. Um, Iron Dome is incredibly effective against short range rockets and missiles, but our enemies at short range learn to try to overwhelm it with hundreds and hundreds of projectiles at once. But Arrow, the Arrow missile system, which is meant to catch ballistic missiles from 1,000 or 1,500 kilometers away, which is roughly the distance of Iran, have a much, much harder time and are supposed to have a much harder time. In other words, these are missiles traveling much faster, they're much larger, they have tremendous amounts of momentum, and they have very large warheads. And pieces of them can fall with sheer kinetic energy to already cause damage and hurt people. So that's even after you've intercepted and blown them up. And yet, the system did an extraordinary job. The bomb shelters built into every apartment constructed in Israel since 1992 did an incredible job. The last attack in Beersheba on the very last day, in the very last couple of hours, actually killed people in their bomb shelters essentially by a direct hit. But that was the exception. Almost in every other case, everyone in a bomb shelter survived, and people who were not in a bomb shelter in a building where a missile slammed through top to bottom and got all the way to the ground by cutting through 6 or 7 apartments, the people not in the bomb shelter were the ones hurt or killed. 24 is not what Iran was supposed to be able to produce in terms of death toll in Israel. It was supposed to be multiple orders of magnitude higher. So I think that at one level, look, every Israeli family is just, you and I have talked about this. Just, it's good to get the kids out of the house. It's just been, 12 days of sirens and anxiety and them sleeping in the bomb shelter rooms. And there's a sense that things have opened up and released, and there's a relief there. But there's an even, I think, deeper, longer term relief in discovering the scale of the gap in competence between the people who protect us and the people who want to kill us in that ideological regime that has no border with us, has no interests in us, but has, for sheer ideological reasons, built out, spent hundreds of billions over 40 years to try and murder us. It turns out that we're better than them.
Right. I agree with you, Haviv, that there is a sense in the country that we faced the boogeyman and we won, meaning we're still here. That in itself is victory against the built up boogeyman for the past, several decades. This is the archetypical evil enemy of Israel that, of course, our Prime Minister Netanyahu has held up for the world to see. Just really displaying all of its intentions, which we, of course, saw right now when some 550 ballistic missiles were launched from Iran and over 1,000 drones. About 90% were intercepted of the ballistic missiles. And of course, there was destruction. And I'm talking about destruction on the layer of nuclear bomb level. It just looks so terrible in terms of, if you put it into a Hollywood rubric, these buildings that have been hit or even just affected by the shock wave are just shells of themselves. And it was extremely frightening, I would have to say, for many of the people, especially those who lived in the center of the country. We lucky ones who lived just outside of Jerusalem were spared a lot of this destruction and the intensive sirens that many of our compatriots at the Times of Israel were facing every night, over and over and over and over. But let's move on and talk about how our Prime Minister is shaping the narrative of the war now that it's over. What are you hearing from him?
There's a lot of parts to that. One is that obviously Netanyahu is never not campaigning. So this is very much the campaign, right? He has pictures of visiting places that were hit. He doesn't usually visit places that were hit because he's afraid people will yell at him on camera. For example, he doesn't visit the October 7 sites of the great massacres of October 7, and still hasn't, even now when he's been invited by the people who live there for more than a year and a half. But he has, and he walked into the local falafel place and he spent cash to buy a falafel, and people noted that he doesn't walk around with a wallet or cash on him. So this is all very staged, and there's a sense that he's very much now in a re-election campaign, and a lot of speculation that this is a moment where he thinks it would be good for him to go to early elections. That's probably not a bad he's certainly acting as though that's what's in his mind, and it's probably not a bad idea moving forward.
Though I have to say,
But
Haviv, that
yeah,
having the deaths of these 7 soldiers in Gaza right on the heels of this great victory in Iran is a huge slap in the face, a reality check, I think, to the country. And I mean, you can tell I myself, I'm very depressed about this, obviously, because I have skin in the game, skin that I created in my own womb. My son goes in and out of Gaza. And it is, of course, a huge issue that were he to go to elections, and this failure of not wrapping up the war with the total victory that we've been told is just a hair's breadth away for over a year. I don't know if he would so quickly win, because of course elections aren't tomorrow. If you were to call elections, it would be what, 3 months? No.
yeah, it would be 90 days. I would say this. First of all, Gaza is the other war. In other words, or maybe all the wars are the other wars. Gaza is the main one. I don't know. But it was clear on October 7, and it's something that we talked about on these podcasts already beginning on October 7, that this was not going to end anywhere except Iran. And in a sense, that circle has been closed. We took out the proxy systems, or at least the main one, Hezbollah, the one that threatened us most. And a lot of the infrastructures in Iraq and Syria, all the way to Iran itself. And that was the great existential threat. And even the damage only made Netanyahu's point. In other words, um, he argued at the beginning of the war we had not just, it wasn't just about the nuclear program, it was also about the ballistic missile program. Iran has this one medium range ballistic missile with 2,000-kilometer range that can reach Israel and can carry a 1.5 ton warhead. Now that's both roughly the weight of the warhead, but it's also the explosive capacity of the warhead, the explosive power of equivalent to 1.5 tons of TNT. You put together 10,000 of those, and you hit Israel with 10,000 of those over the course of a war, that's Hiroshima. That is the amount of explosive power of the Hiroshima nuclear bomb. And Netanyahu pointed out that they're massively trying to escalate. In other words, if the nuclear program is constantly being disrupted by Israeli intelligence and by the world and by causing sanctions, causing them tremendous costs, they're still pursuing it. They're going to pursue it. They're never not going to pursue it. This regime exists on the ideology of the exporting of the revolutionary idea. They're never not going to pursue it, no matter the cost to Iran, no matter the bankrupting of Iran. But they could produce a similar scale event on the ballistic missile program if they can build it out. Now, those factories are mostly destroyed. Iran was only capable of building 50 a month at the beginning of this war, and it can't build 50 a month. I'd be surprised to find out if by the final assessment, the Israeli intelligence concludes that it could build 10 a month. The 3,000 missile arsenal that Iran had stockpiled, many of which are not the big 1.5 ton warheads, they're much smaller. That is now 500. So 2,500 are gone. 550 shot at Israel, the rest destroyed by the IDF. Imagine 5 times the number of missiles actually hitting. Imagine twice or 3 times larger. There were volleys taken out at rates of 95% by the Arrow missile system. Again, against a much more difficult actual missile, which is traveling so much faster, so it's harder to hit. So everything we've seen of the damage on the ground validates Netanyahu's point that there were, 2 goals of this war. Of the larger war, there's a third goal, which is the proxy system, but there were 2 goals, the nuclear program and the ballistic missile program, which over time can be as dangerous or more than the nuclear program.
Just to add on to what you're saying, Haviv, there were 31 strikes that hit, meaning Israel did take out around 90% of these missiles. And we've, of course, seen these pictures of the destruction wrought from these 31 that did actually hit. I'm talking about, of course, on buildings, on homes, on the Weizmann Institute, on electrical facilities, on the Haifa port area. This was mass destruction. So I take your point that Israel did.
It was not. It was a mass destruction avoided. That's the thing. It was totally avoided. And what little did get through only demonstrated the importance of the launcher hunt that the Air Force was doing throughout the skies of Iran, where every time something launched, they hunted it down and destroyed the launchers. And Iran, even if it had stockpiles, literally couldn't get enough launchers out at a time to actually produce a strategic level. So they basically did this tiny little thing that, now that's not helpful to know if, your family member died in this war, but very, very few people's family members actually got hurt or died. And that's the point. And
I
then you
agree
turn
with you
around to,
100%,
yeah,
Haviv, about the avoiding the larger ballistic missile threat. It seems like Israel did actually accomplish that goal. But now we're hearing reports out of the United States in terms of the intelligence assessment. Of course, these are preliminary, they were leaked. We don't actually know if they're accurate. But that instead of pushing back the nuclear program by years or generations or all sorts of, lofty rhetoric, it could just be a matter of months. So is this indeed a victory?
absolutely. First of all, I have no idea what these intelligence assessments are. These are appeals to authority by often interested parties. Some of it may be incredibly correct. Some of it has proven to be incorrect by decades. The CIA, famously predicted that the Soviet Union would last forever, and Castro in the 1960s wouldn't last the decade. And they predicted it with all the gravitas of, the American WASP Brahmins telling the world what it should know about itself. And it was just utterly and completely a misunderstanding of everything that was happening either in Cuba or the Soviet Union. And we've seen that on the Iranian nuclear program. The Obama folks, the Obama administration had infinite number of data points defending its position. And Iran still moved forward with a nuclear program. And the IAEA report 3 weeks ago revealed that there are entire new hidden sites that exist that Iran has admitted to, and it admitted to basically lying its way through almost everything. And we're still not expected to think that the JCPOA, didn't see them, apply to them, deal with them in any way, but was perfect. Trump pulling out of the JCPOA drove Iran to massively enrich the uranium to almost weapons grade level, but most of the enrichment happened under the Biden administration that didn't do anything. So there's so much partisan sort of trying to blame the other and that it's very hard to know what is and how much do they actually know what Iran is capable of. If, for example, we have this debate in Israel about Fordo, right? The Americans dropped the massive ordnance penetrators in Fordo, and then the Israelis followed up with a series of Israeli airstrikes. And a lot of people were asking what that meant. And there was a suggestion among these sort of open source intelligence people, the OSINT kind of community in Hebrew on Twitter and a little bit also in the English world. There was a debate about whether that meant that, in fact, the massive ordnance penetrators hadn't done a whole lot of damage. That was the final assessment from whatever intelligence sources the Israelis had in Fordo. And so they were trying to double down on it, smash more of it. A lot of the attack targeted the entrances and the roads leading up, meaning bury Fordo if you can't destroy Fordo, even without American MOP. And other people argued the exact opposite. In other words, Fordo was smashed, was destroyed, and now Iran needs to rebuild. So do you want it to be able to rebuild with, 8 months of digging it out, or trying to find whatever enriched uranium, whatever survives in the lowest floors, or do you want it to take them 16 months? And the Israelis just added more layers of basically material, dirt and rock to have to sift through. That was the question. And so we don't know anything about whether it was a success or not a success. These assessments are coming in. We don't know what's good intelligence, what's bad intelligence. Fordo was completely built in secret until suddenly it was revealed to the world. And now both Iran and the IAEA claim that there are whole other sites that nobody has seen. The bombing of Natanz, of the enrichment facilities in Natanz, included a bombing of a cave outside the actual known site that nobody had known about until the Israelis struck it. And so it's so big and so complex. There's a whole debate about whether or not they moved 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. There were 16 trucks that went in and came out. Was that equipment? Was that dirt to bury it themselves? Because if it's already going to get bombed and you bury it first, you bury it intact. And nothing absorbs the shock waves and the explosives and just a simple bullets and shrapnel like dirt. And so maybe the Iranians were protecting by actually burying themselves some of the equipment, some of the enriched uranium. 16 trucks is far too much to move 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. So what were 16 trucks? And the answer is Nobody at our level of clearance has any idea. There's a huge amount of speculation. We just don't know. The Iranian nuclear program could be set back 10 years. It could be set back 6 months. It could also be one of those assessments where it just leaves out all Israeli and Western agency. In other words, if now everyone else in the world disappears and Iran gets to live in the perfect, pristine world where this regime can do whatever it wants with any resources it wants and has infinite money, it could have a nuclear program back on its feet in 11 months. That could be the assessment. But that's not the world. The world is constant disruption. What the Israelis did, what the Israelis believe they did, isn't destroy the nuclear program and now they're sailing off into the sunset, the end, the movie's over. What they believe they did is that they are in the middle of a very, very tense game against a serious opponent, and they push the ball way down the field. And now the enemy has a say, and the enemy will try to recover, and is running defense, and is going to bring the ball back. And we have done tremendous amount of things that just brings the next play into play. So everything is going to continue. The Mossad is already on its next operations. The Air Force is already planning. Everybody has to, restockpile and all of their, right? The Iranians have to rebuild their air defenses. They're not going to have Russian S-300s anymore because they don't work against the Israelis. So now they have to rethink everything they ever knew about their own protection and defense. Israel penetrated Iranian intelligence worse than it had penetrated Hezbollah. And I think that was a new discovery for the Iranians. And so now they're going to be looking at Hamas-scale compartmentalization. What does that mean? Does that limit how much they can actually build? All of these huge questions. I think on balance, this was such a bigger victory than anyone had any inkling the Israelis were even remotely capable of. We thought this would be much worse, and we thought we could do much less. And we ended up doing tremendous things to the missile arsenal, to the nuclear program, to their ability to defend themselves in their skies. Israel now controls Iranian airspace anytime it wants to, and there's nothing Iran can do about it. None of that was on anybody's bingo card. So this was a smashing, astonishing, strategic level success, and now comes the next fight. And that's how it's going to be with this regime until a revolutionary regime with no reason to destroy Israel except a redemptionist, obsessive, religious vision no longer has that vision. And so, the game continues.
We'll go to a short break.
With Operation Rising Lion in full force, the moment to act is now. Your investment sends a clear message. Israel is not alone. Go to israelbonds.com or scan the on-screen QR code to invest in Israel bonds now.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our senior analyst, Haviv Rettig Gur. Haviv, I have a question. We've talked about so far Netanyahu's shaping of the narrative. We've talked a little bit about the U.S. shaping of the narrative of this war, and I want to talk now about the Iranian shaping of the narrative. We, as you just discussed, don't actually know what their capabilities are right now. We really don't have enough intelligence to form a clear picture of what is happening on the ground. But I would like to hypothesize that the Iranian regime is a huge victor here. Why? Because the people did not rise up during this 12-day war. The people did not take to the streets and try and overthrow the government, which it seemed to me there was a bit of a window of opportunity there, especially since the U.S. president was, toying with the idea. And of course, our prime minister has blatantly said that that is a goal. So what do you think about this hypothesis that the real huge victor here is actually the Iranian regime because it too survived?
I mean, Nasrallah once made this argument that Hezbollah has a huge advantage over Israel because the only thing it needs to call victory is to still be around. Whereas Israel has to actually make its country safe and has to actually defeat its enemies and has to actually, build its economy and has a population whose opinion matters because it's a democracy and its leadership has to win elections. All Hezbollah has to do is not be fully destroyed to the last Hezbollah guy when the war is over, and that's victory. Okay, sure. Or you could build your country and not have a destitute people living in one of the most energy-rich countries on earth and not have corruption and just oppression destroy every good and thing, every talent, every capability, every potential achievement of your nation for 4 decades, or just literally still existing when the war is over and you have failed to deliver any meaningful blows to the enemy, and the enemy took over your skies without a single plane being downed and did anything they wanted to over your airspace, counts as a victory because you literally still exist. Fine.
But
That's
the people
it's
didn't
moving
rise
the
up,
goalposts.
Haviv.
The people didn't rise up, but that was never an Israeli goal. Ever. Not ever. And it was never depicted that way by Netanyahu. Israel is, I mean, it's really worth talking about. I think we've also talked about it. Israel is the size of Austria. It has the population of Austria. Iran has a population 9 times Israel's. And Iran has a country that is geographically 60 times the size of Israel. Israel is not going to regime change Iran from 1,500 kilometers away. Israel never fantasized about regime changing Iran. Israel did not say regime change was a goal of the war. Israel said regime change because of the humiliation of this dictatorship and the demonstration that the dictatorship, it had exacted catastrophic, massive costs from the Iranian people for generations, spent hundreds of billions on these proxies. And the destruction of Israel was the first major, it argued that the destruction of Israel was the first major sign of its grand plan and success. And then it delivered nothing. All of it had been wasted. You come to the Iranian people and you say to a poverty-stricken nation that you made poverty-stricken for no reason. 10% of the world's oil reserves lie under Iran, and it's one of the poorest peoples in the region. You come to them and you say to them, we spent $500 billion and none of it actually worked, right? The Arab world was silent in this war. Hezbollah was told, bomb them now, and by a desperate Iran. And this Hezbollah that had been built for generations, 2 generations, to do nothing but bomb Israel now, said no publicly. And you come to the Iranian people and you say, thank you for spending $500 billion on this wasted, insane, messianic garbage. And that's really all you have to offer them. Now, Iran is a regime that has spent 46 years failing at everything, except for one thing. And that one thing it didn't fail at was oppressing its own people. The one thing it didn't fail at was making sure, and this is from the very beginnings of the revolution. People forget the revolution begins in December 1978 against the Shah because he's quite a repressive regime. And the revolution is everybody in Iran. It's millions of people. And they come to the streets in their millions on December 10 and 11, 1978. And they're marching with banners about feminism and liberalism and parliaments and democracy. And then the religious segment of that grand coalition, which includes liberals and nationalists and communists, that religious segment, the clerical movement under Khomeini, then takes over and cracks down and literally murders, mass murders, and kicks out of the new political state that they had built, the liberals and all the others and the communists, etc. And so this grand coalition of every part of the Iranian people, middle class and rich and poor and the bazaar merchants, everybody, marches against the Shah, topples the Shah, creates a new Iran, and then the religious people over the next 8-9 years, almost from the beginning really, crack down on them, establish the Revolutionary Guard Corps, establish the rule of the Ayatollahs, and take away from the Iranian people this grand coalition of everybody. So this regime, its definition, its identity, is that religious theocracy keeping every other piece of Iranian society down. And Israel from far away can do everything it wants to do to the IRGC, but it can't literally engineer Iranian society. And it's so small that it can never be confused on that point. America also can't, but America is so big and powerful and has armies of hundreds of thousands that it can send in the other side of the world that occasionally it accidentally thinks it can. Israel's too small to even fall into the trap of ever imagining that it can. And so, no, that was never a goal. It was a desirable outcome, but it wasn't something Israel ever believed that it could drive. And what's wonderful about all of this discourse now, and it's all over the internet, and it's all over Press TV, and it's leaking into Al Jazeera Persian and BBC Persian, and then over into English and Arabic of both, networks. What's wonderful is that the goalposts were always going to move. In other words, the IRGC said destroying Israel is the measure of our success. And then it's no longer destroying Israel, it's hurting Israel. And then it's no longer hurting Israel, it's facing down the Israeli Air Force and downing a few planes. And when there's not really all that much damage in Tel Aviv, the propagandists come in and argue that a third of Tel Aviv is destroyed and, Tel Aviv looks like Gaza. These were arguments on Twitter with tens of millions of people liking them, seeing them, sharing them, viewing them. And it was all fantasy. And now the simple act of survival. I argued this week that Israel had turned the Iranian regime into Hezbollah. The point of Hezbollah, the point of the Iranian strategy of drones and missiles and proxies was to make Israelis afraid of the sky. And we have made the enemy afraid of the sky. And we have also made the enemy understand that we will continue to demolish it forever and ever until it stops trying to kill us. And Iran now lives the life of it invented Hezbollah to destroy us, and we have managed to make it Hezbollah. It lives exactly in the fears that Hezbollah lives in. Its capabilities are destroyed, and it can basically do to us a smaller version of what Hezbollah was supposed to be able to do to us, but it takes all of Iran to do so. Now, you want to define that now as victory because they're literally still in existence? Mazel tov. That's Nasrallah. That's his great argument. And it was great on paper. It was great propaganda. It really played well to, anti-Israel audiences around the world. And they're destroyed. And he's dead. So best of luck to the Iranian regime moving the goalposts so far back that existence is victory. We strive for more. We actually want our kids to have a beautiful, wonderful, thriving future. If the Iranian regime wanted for their people what our state and our people want for our kids and our people, the Iranian people would be much better off and nobody would be fighting any wars.
Haviv, I thank you so much for all of your thoughts.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another episode tomorrow. This installment was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.